my name is Stephanie Schaefer. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of North Texas. My dissertation is a case study on collaborative learning environments found in makerspaces or digital fabrication labs. My career goal is a chaos coordinator for the visual arts. One of the things I feel most passionate about is creating art experiences for students and opportunities for them to connect with their community. I would like to have more opportunities to organize events for the City of Garland and public schools to make our community more connected and racially sensitive. The visual arts in public education dates back to 1960s when Massachusetts began teaching drawing in school. Drawing was believed to develop intellectual, moral, economic reasoning, and developed fine motor skills for industrial workers. Following World War II, schools enacted philosophies of progressive education with child-centered approach for the arts in creative and therapeutic self-expression. At the same time, the field of art therapy began to emerge. By the 1960s, art therapy in art education was seen as two distinct fields, but separate philosophies, purposes, degree programs, and professional organizations. Researchers have argued that art education can help students develop a deeper appreciation and understanding of the world around them. This drawing is from one of my students, from a drawing exercise called automatic drawing. Providing services for students with special needs has evolved dramatically over the past 150 years. For the first half of the 20th century, many children and adults with disabilities were placed in institutions for full-time care, living apart from their families and in overcrowded sites with limited or no education opportunities. Public perception of people with disabilities began to change in the 1960s when John F. Kennedy's sister, Rosemary, had a cognitive disability and advocated for people with disabilities. This led to a new psychological approach to focus on what students can do instead of what they cannot do. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 provides anti-discrimination protections for children with disabilities. In 1970, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed, guaranteeing the availability of free and appropriate public education and individual education plans for all students with disabilities. It also required that parents be notified of their children's educational rights. This legislation change granted public education access for millions of children who had been previously excluded from attending school with their peers. In 1990, the Education for All Disabled Children Act was reconfigured to make the wording more concise and make the terminology more politically correct. This version was called IDEA. Under this new plan, public school would require all children with disabilities under the age of 16 to have an individualized education plan, an IEP. This plan also included a requirement to locate, identify, and evaluate children with disabilities. From birth to age 21, school districts are required to provide special education services at public expense and may not refuse services based on financial constraints. Child fine is a legal requirement for schools to fine students who have disabilities and may be entitled to special education services. Schools can be penalized for not offering services to eligible students. Child fine applies to children in public schools and private schools, and homeschooled children as well. IDEA laid out terms specifically designed to meet the unique needs of children with disabilities. Special education is the program that provides services to students who meet the criteria to receive individualized support. To qualify for the services, students must have one of these 13 listed disabilities, and the students must have an educational need for these services. How does a student qualify for special education services? Eligibility for special education begins with a referral The referral can come from a parent or a teacher, a counselor, or a caseworker. Sometimes the referral begins as a response to intervention when a child is struggling in school. Students can be evaluated once a year. Parents must give their permission for their child to be tested for special education. After parents have given their consent, they are required to be notified of their child's educational rights before they begin the evaluation process. If the student has been identified for a need for special education, then the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, is written with the parent with specific outcomes in mind. In special education, students are required to receive an Individualized Education Plan, an IEP. This document the student's present skill level, identifies the strengths, weaknesses, and educational needs. It also identifies the child's diagnosis. It lists the annual goals and objectives. It documents the program placement, lists accommodations, and level of participation. The IEP team usually includes the parent's school administrator and special education teacher, the general education teacher, professionals who performed the assessment, and the student. If appropriate, a translator is provided. Students have the right to agree or disagree with any part of their child's IEP. IDEA requires that the student be placed in the least restrictive environment. I regularly work with caseworkers to place them in my ceramic or sculpture classes where they are encouraged to explore and experiment with as many materials as possible. If the evaluation finds that the child is not eligible for special education, parents can file a grievance and have their case be reevaluated. In many cases, the students are eligible for 504 programs. Andrew versus Douglas County School District. Andrew is an autistic 5th grade student that was placed in a private school because his parents believed that the public school education he was receiving was inadequate. His parents sued the district for reimbursement of his private school tuition and related expenses. The family believed that if the free public school could not meet their child's unique needs, then they could go to a private school and then be reimbursed for their expenses. The family cited the Individuals with Disability Act provided them with free and appropriate public education. It's a common misunderstanding with Individuals with Disability Act to think that if a free public education cannot meet the student's educational needs, then the parents may enroll their children in a private school and seek reimbursement for tuition and related expenses. But specific criteria must be in place for this to happen. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled what level of education benefit school districts are required to provide children with disabilities under the Free and Appropriate Public Education Act. The court ultimately found that the child should be making adequate progress and allowed for them to be fully integrated into a classroom and advance from grade to grade. The court concluded that some benefit and make progress should result in higher standard than merely the minimum. If a student is not eligible to receive special education services, they may qualify for 504 under the American Disability Act of 1973. A child receiving services under 504 does not receive the same mandates as a child receiving special education services. A 504 refers to classroom accommodations and curriculum modifications. A 504 should include what modifications or accommodations will be provided and is sent to all the teachers to sign and acknowledge that they will provide those adaptations. These might be allowing extra time for assignments, given preferential seating, frequent reminders to stay on task, or being assigned assignments in chunks. It is highly encouraged to provide an inclusive environment for students with disabilities in general and art classrooms. In 1975, Public Law 94-142 stated that relative services may include services such as artistic and cultural programs such as art, music, drama programs they offered to general education students. This also means that art education teachers were pioneers of inclusion classrooms. Today, art education is classified as a core subject and is required for high school graduation. Thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation.